Yay. Hi, everybody. Hi, and welcome to my channel, Emma Desi. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and hit that little bell button so that you get notified when there is a new interview available, because I'm often interviewing wonderful people like I'm going to be today with Mary Helen Sheriff, all about her fabulous and funny book, Boop and Eve's Road Trip. But before we delve into that, let me just tell you a little bit about Mary Helen Sheriff. She is the co-editor of a collaborative anthology entitled Launchpad, The Countdown to Marketing Your Book. And she is the author of the Ultimate Book Launch Workbook. Ta-dun! Her debut women's fiction, Boop and Eve's Road Trip, was an American Fiction Award winner and a finalist for the Montaigne Medal and an Eric Hoffer Award. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of these things, not all of them, because there's a lot. We're going to focus on your fiction and we're going to focus on your Ultimate Book Launch Workbook. But you are a busy lady, Mary Helen Sheriff. So tell me, first of all, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And also, so tell us a little bit about your journey to writing, because the people I speak to, it's never straightforward. There's always a scenic route to getting here.
Yes, scenic for sure. I decided I wanted to be a writer when I was 23. I won't tell you exactly how many years ago that was, but several decades. And I was in graduate school and I was given an assignment for a class called Methods and Materials for Teaching Social Studies. And we were supposed to take this idea from a picture book called Letters from Felix, where there's like this little stuffed rabbit who gets left on an airplane. And the stuffed rabbit sends the little boy who owns him postcards from wherever the airplane takes him. And so our professor was saying this would be a really cool assignment for kids to do to learn geography. And you could have them create their own character, and you could have them, go to different places you're studying. If you happen to be studying a country, or you could go to time periods, like you could do whatever you wanted. It could be a different motor. It doesn't have to be a plane. It could be anything. So he said, why don't you write up what this assignment would look like, and then relate it to the SOLs or the standards that you teach, and then make a sample. So I was like, okay, this sounds fun. So I did that. And then my sample, instead of being a picture book, was a novel. Which was not the assignment. Maybe novella is a better, more accurate thing. I think it was like 90 pages or something. So it wasn't, quite novel length, but it sure wasn't a picture book. So that was kind of the moment where I was like, hey, I really like doing this. It was probably the first time I'd written and just kind of gotten swept away into the whole thing. I got a job teaching. I wrote some in the summers. I took classes. I got an MFA. I thought I was going to write children's books. But I just couldn't get an agent. I couldn't get it published. Self-publishing was still new. It isn't quite where it is now. I kept trying to go traditionally. And then when I had my first child, I quit my job to be a stay-at-home mom, but also, secretly, because I was going to write novels, oh, I could do both of these things. This would be awesome. Anyway, and that's, in that road is when I started writing this book, and it was going to be a young adult novel. It turned into a grown-up book, because grandma, who's 80, is like the narrator for half the book, which you really can't do in a young adult novel. So I made my protagonist, she was originally going to be in boarding school. I just put her in college instead. So, she's technically an adult too. And then, I made an adult book, and then I could add sex scenes and, all kinds of fun stuff. Cussing, it's great.
More adult themes. So this was a story kind of long in the making then. You took your time with it and you enjoyed writing it, and eventually
Yeah. So I wrote 3 other books before this one that didn't ever see the light of day. And probably shouldn't. Maybe one of them could still. I still believe one of them has hope, but the other 2, not so much. But this one did, probably 7 years from I'm starting to write this to I have signed a publishing contract. It's a long time.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I did this full time, right? I'm raising kids. I had some part-time jobs, it was, and I rewrote it so many times. I did not do this efficiently.
No. But who does with their first book though? I think, especially when you're raising young people as well, young babies, your brain isn't always where it could be or where it was when you were pre-children. I think 7 years is probably relatively average for a
Do you
first.
think?
Yeah, between 5 and 10. I think there's very few people who kind of make that decision, right? I'm gonna build a catalog of 30 books and they do it in 3 years. Like, it's a certain type of mindset that does that, and that is not available to everybody, I don't think.
Not available to me, I don't think.
No, me neither. No, because I do remember listening to, speakers at 20 books to 50K and other indie conferences and thinking, that's what I want to do. But I can't write that fast and I can't write that dispassionately. I kind of get very involved with the book and I'm not a planner. So I just find that mindset just alien to me.
Yeah. I think, talking about mindset, I feel like when you and I chatted about this a little bit before we get on as a sneak preview, but I feel like I'm currently struggling. I have been trying to write in a way that isn't natural for me. I have been trying to be more efficient. I've been trying to write faster. And what has happened is I'm writing from my head instead of from my heart. And that's not where my strength is.
Yeah.
Because what I think I do well is write really emotionally resonating stories. And you don't do that from an intellectual space. You do that because you open up your heart and you're writing from somewhere different.
Yeah.
And I've only recently kind of started to put together why I'm having so much trouble. Like, I knew I was having trouble, but here's my weird segue into this. When I was in high school, I used to act in like plays and stuff, and I haven't done it, since. And I recently had some time open up in my schedule, and it was the sort of thing, like I used to always say, oh, when I retire, I want to do community theater because I think that would be really fun to do in retirement. And then I was like, wait a minute. It's like I happen to have this like weird little space where I just don't have a lot going on. And I thought, you know what? I could do a play. And so I auditioned for a play like last week. I didn't get a part, but it's okay. But when I was talking to the director, she was saying, Mary, stop acting and just be this character. And it was like this light bulb went off. I mean, for that moment, sure. But then also I was like, that's what's not happening with the book I'm writing right now. I'm not being these characters. I'm not feeling their feelings. I'm just writing words and describing stuff and plots, I think that's a huge thing. And if I can approach it differently, I think that's where my entryway is.
Yeah. So with the manuscript that you've been working on, is it that you've been, okay, I'm going to plan this out and then I'm going to write it and I'm going to know everything, how it all works, and then I'll be able to just sit down and go through it?
Yeah, so I do have an outline, but it is like major plot pointy. It's not like you can fit my outline on a page, probably, maybe two, but it's not. I do find that as I write, I change my mind about what my plot's going to be anyway. So it doesn't make a ton of sense for me to go into like minute detail when I start writing a scene that's going to change everything. So I do have an outline, but it is really just big plot points, and they could even change, but I won't have felt like I lost something if they change because it's really, a sentence or two.
Yeah. No, but I think that's what happens with people who kind of write from the heart as opposed to the head, is that they can plan as much as they want, and you could have, a 50-page outline, but when you sit down to write it, it's all going to change.
I need a direction though. I can't just sit down and have like no idea where I'm going. Even if I change my mind, I want a roadmap. I can take some little side trips if I want to, but I want to believe I'm going to end up in Florida if I choose along the way to go to Colorado instead, or hop on a plane and visit you, that's fine.
But as long as you know that that's where you're aiming for. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah, we were talking a little bit earlier about just what a roller coaster is to be not just a writer, but I think in any artistic field, there's an up and down to it, and times where you absolutely feel aligned to it, and how could you have ever considered doing anything else? And then there are other times where we want to pull our hair out and go, why am I doing this? Why did I think that I could, or that I even wanted to?
Yes. And some of that, is related to like internal and external motivations and validations, and how long, excuse me, how long does that you win an award. You mentioned that in the bio. You win an award that carries you for how long? And at some point it has to come from in here, and that's where things start to get tricky.
Yeah.
And are some people just listening to this because I pointed to my heart, just in case we only have audio listeners?
We're all video on this side.
Okay, good,
Yeah,
good.
we're all video. But talking of heart, I love Boop and Eve's road trip, and I really feel that does come from your heart. And I know if I remember from previous conversations, it certainly started with Eve's point of view, and that she was the main person. But then Boop stole your heart, and she's the one that kind of started speaking to you the strongest. So I wonder how you could, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit with us about that evolvement, because I think writers can feel that if things change, then they're doing something wrong, in inverted commas, but that's not necessarily so.
No. So yeah, it was going to be a YA book. Boop was always going to be in it. It was always going to be, I don't know what it's going to call it, but it was always going to be this granddaughter going on a road trip together. But I kind of, think of Boop initially as more of like a Dumbledore character, like I'm the wise one who's going to take you on your path kind of thing. But I decided early in the process that I wanted her to have some point of view scenes at least. And partly because Eve is dealing with depression. And as a reader, that's kind of depressing, like to just have like this angsty teenager whining about all kinds of stuff. And so I wanted to break that up, partly because I don't want someone who is depressed to have to read a book. Like I want this book to instill hope, and I would hope that people who are dealing with depression might read it and relate to it, but then also like feel uplifted by it. And if you just read the first, say, 100 pages with this angsty girl, you might not get any further, right? So I wanted her to offer hope early, right? Like she's this, she's there. You feel like Eve is safe because grandma's with her, and this is gonna end up okay. And Boop is also funny, which I think also helps break that up some. But as I started writing point of view scenes from her, she had all this backstory that kept coming up, and why is this way, and how does this work? And I knew the backstory when I started, but I didn't know how much the backstory was going to be part of it. Like it in my head, it might have just been like a paragraph, or like maybe one scene where we see that, but instead Boop still had some things she had to reconcile in her own life, secrets that she had kept for decades and decades and decades that were just adding toxicity to her whole family, because people made assumptions, not knowing those secrets, that they would not have made up these stories to explain her behavior that were not true.
Yeah, but there's also that secrecy within the book as well, that things that cannot be talked about, and I think that's something that all families can relate to. All families have got, we don't talk about Auntie so and so or Uncle Bob or whatever it might be.
Right. And I think, generationally, I think we've gotten better about that. I don't think that our generation is as secretive as previous ones were. I think that we have been raised to be more transparent and authentic, and to let some things go. Maybe sometimes too much, like maybe we need to recalibrate that a little bit. But yeah, I think that's like, I think secrets, sometimes a secret can be a good thing. And I'm not going to say they're never okay, but like sometimes they eat away at you, and sometimes a secret that might have made sense at one time doesn't make sense anymore. And I think that's maybe where Boop is. Like, I'm not sure that it shouldn't have been a secret initially. Maybe, I mean, in the context and in the place that she was, maybe that was the right decision to make, which is hard to imagine because it certainly wouldn't be now. But it certainly didn't need to be a secret anymore. But sometimes once you start a secret, you feel like you have to keep it, right? Like, because then if once you tell it, you've been lying for how long?
Yeah. So we're obviously not going to say what that secret was, but it's a good one. And but tell us a little bit. So it evolved, yes, the story evolved, and Boop is a great character, as is her sister. They're both fantastic characters. But tell us a little bit about this. So the story evolved. Tell us about it now as it is, and what readers might expect from it.
Sure. So Eve is a 19-year-old college student. She is struggling with depression. Nothing like horrible has happened to her. She has just, put herself in a new space and is having trouble finding herself, which I think is a really common thing for a lot of college freshmen, to have some struggles around that. And so that's where she is. Her grandmother lives nearby and realizes what's happening. Her grandmother has had issues with depression in the past. She sees it, she recognizes it. And so she manipulates her granddaughter into taking her on a road trip with her. So the granddaughter's cousin, who's also her best friend, has kind of gone MIA. The granddaughter thinks she knows where she is. She says, "Hey grandma, can I borrow your car? I wanna go on a road trip." Doesn't tell her about the cousin because she doesn't want the family getting all wound up. And grandma says, "Sure, you can borrow my car, but you have to take me along and we have to go visit my sister." And therein lies the impetus for the road trip. But grandma really just wants to figure out what's going on with her granddaughter and help. And visiting her sister is not the pleasant family visit you might be anticipating, because grandma's sister knows the secret we were alluding to earlier, and is sort of hinting that she's going to blackmail her if she doesn't do some stuff, and that she needs to get over here right now and help her out with some stuff. So that's kind of fun too. So that's how Boop's story is sort of unwinding, with her sister blackmailing her about the secret, and then her granddaughter is sort of unraveling, and then we have a cousin who's missing and we don't know what's going on with that.
It's what I love about it, is you've got just the generational aspect to it, and I think that you write about older women really, really well, and how and I'm beginning to see this playing out in my own family life, because my daughter's just entered her tweens, so she's gone from adorable little 10-year-old, 11-year-old into what is coming. And I see that shift from believing, that shift that kids make from thinking that their parents and their family are the stalwarts of their life and they offered that guidance and that stability, to what appears to me very quickly deciding that their parents know absolutely nothing, are completely useless, and how have they ever managed to survive as long as they have. And so we can see kind of, I think, Eve going through a little bit of this, particularly with her own mother. But it's lovely to see the generations play out with each other, and that we slowly learn that the grandmothers and the great aunts, they've all been through stuff. Everybody goes through stuff, and it's only when we get to a certain age and we can look back and see what stuff we've been through. And then Eve is at the beginning of that journey and coming through. And I think you weave those relationships together really, really well.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the other things I really struggled with was writing the bad guys. And I really like where it landed. So like the mother is a secondary character. She's kind of a villain, as is the blackmailing sister. And when I first wrote them, you knew kind of from the very beginning that they had stories. I even had a chapter early on where it were only like 2 in the whole book, but where like the mother had a point of view scene. So you knew she loved her daughter and was trying to be a good mom, even though you saw the stuff she was doing. But I got feedback that it would be way better if I made everybody hate her and like just threw her under the bus and made her a villain. So I did, but then I still couldn't handle that, because I think a really important part of the story is that we do a lot of crappy things in the name of love.
Mm.
And we do things with the right intentions that are the absolute wrong thing. And that's what this mother was doing. And I felt like she needed to at least have a moment towards the end where that could be really clear. Like, it's not that I hate my kid. It's not that I'm trying to make her miserable, but I'm pretty messed up myself and I'm trying to do the right thing, and it's not.
Yeah. Yay.
Yeah, so I did end up kind of pulling back at the end to like say, hey, you know, she's
But I
not
think,
really a villain. I mean, she is, but she's not.
no, she's not a villain. And I think that does come through really, really strongly. Nor would I say the like Boop's sister is a villain. She
No,
has
she's
some,
also trying to do the right thing for people that she loves.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we all kind of make those. What struck me was, and is that sometimes daughters want to do the opposite of what their parents did,
Yeah.
and we can take that too far the other direction. And so maybe only with time and with age do we find more of that middle ground and that balance between both doing our own thing and recognizing our
Yeah.
parents.
Yes. I think humans have a real tendency to overcorrect.
Yes, yes. Oh my goodness. Isn't that funny saying that? Because I do think we see that societally as well, don't we? Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yes. Oh my goodness. So, so it's a lovely book, and just for our listeners, I want to say my book group, we read it for our book of the month, and Mary very kindly came in to chat to us about it and talk about the book. So if you are a member of a book club and you read the book, I do encourage it. And Mary's very kind and very generous with her time, and we'll come in and have a chat, and you can ask all the questions about the secret that you might have.
Yes.
So, fabulous book. You obviously were feeling good about it. You mentioned previously that you had wanted to go the traditional route for publishing, and I think you were still quite keen to do that for this book as well.
Yeah, so that is how I started the process. So I finished it, I thought, and I sent it out to a bunch of agents, and I got a bunch of basically form letter rejections, and it was sort of like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, I don't know if my query letter is just terrible, or if the book is terrible, if something on the first page is turning you on. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to this writing retreat. It's called the Algonquian Writers Retreat, and it isn't really called this, but the guy who runs it, Michael Neff, calls it the sort of behind the scenes, the tough love retreat. And so basically he gets like a couple agents to come and spend 20 minutes with each author, and you kind of pitch them your story, and then they tell you for real what they think.
Okay.
Right? Not like this little pitch thing where you go in for 2 minutes and they go, oh yes, oh no thanks. Like, this was like a legitimate conversation. They met us for dinner later and drinks later. You know, like, it was like really attempting to have like a real conversation about your work. Now, they hadn't read it. You were just telling them, talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they could ask questions and things like that. So anyway, so I did this, and inevitably what I found out was I had broken 3 rules that I had never heard of existed. I still have never seen anything in writing except for like, not just one of these agents, but several of them told me this in separate conversations. So it wasn't like they were all on a panel going, yes, it was like independently they were telling me. And there were rules for authors who are new, right? Like, if I was, because I could think of a million books that broke these rules, but their point was they were already established. You aren't. So if you're an unknown person and you do these 3 things, 3 red flags, I'm not going to read your book.
Okay.
So red flag number 1 was and also remember this, I think it is important that this was like in maybe 2017. I do think some of this stuff has shifted a little bit. Okay. So I don't know that these are still hard and fast, but rule number 1 I broke was it was an alternating first person.
Oh.
And they said that books written for adults, not the YA is different, but books written for adults sold better in third person. So again, not that there aren't tons of books in first person, but they sell better if they're in third person in general.
Okay.
2, the book was set in the 1990s. And they said that's not contemporary and it's not historical. On a bookshelf, I don't know where to put it.
Interesting.
Yep. And 3, it was very character driven. It still is a very character driven novel, but it was more character driven. And so they said for a first time author, it is harder to sell those 3 things. And that he's like, they're not talking about your writing. They're not talking about the quality of your book. I'm talking about my job as an agent, which is to sell your book. And as an unknown author, I'm going to have a hard time selling it if you have all 3 of those things, which typically make a book harder to sell.
That's so interesting. I find that fascinating. Too character driven. I get the thing about 1990s. It's not one thing or the other, although I now understand that 1990s is considered vintage now. So you have dress.
So yeah, I think maybe I was just on the edge, and if I was trying to publish it now, I could. Yes.
And then the alternating first person, I think, is fascinating as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think more books are written in first person now than they were then. So that may not be as true. I mean, I don't know. So anyway, I walked out of there feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach, because you're a writer, like that's a huge stuff to fix. Like that's not like I can go sit down an hour and fix my book to make it marketable. And that was really the thing. This is not like to make your book good. This is to make your book marketable. And I think that's an important, distinction there. So then it was like, well, do I care enough to do all of this work to not necessarily make a better work, but to make a marketable book? I don't know. So I spent 6 months squirming. Like, I don't know if I want to do that. Mad, sad, frustrated, whatever. And then I decided that I was going to rewrite the first chapter only, and I was going to put it in third person close, and I was going to move it to contemporary, and I would think about the plot, later. But let's just write this first paragraph with these 2 changes, or first chapter. And darned Emma if it wasn't better too. I mean, I don't think the 1990s thing mattered. I kind of liked the references to stuff in the 90s. I just thought that was fun. It wasn't necessary. It was just fun. But the third person close, the writing was so much stronger than it had been when I had it first person. So that was really eye-opening for me, because the first person allowed me to get in the characters' heads and in their hearts, but the third person allowed me to look around the room better.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
So by doing it close, I still had their thoughts and their voice in that prose, but I could talk about the table for a little while, even if the character wasn't sitting there like fixated on the table. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't do I'm not a big, huge description writer anyway, but like it did allow me to do it better. And I didn't lose the voice and I didn't lose the heart. I just added components to it that I think were missing in the other version.
You do hear about writers trying things in a different point of view and it unlocking something. And I'm just curious, do you think if you'd started with that third close point of view, you would have had the same impact? Do you think you needed to do it in first? I
think I did. I think I did. And I'm not saying there isn't a point where maybe I could not have to, but I think in that time, with the skills that I had and the knowledge that I had, I don't think I could have written it in third close initially.
Okay, so that'll be, I think, encouraging for people to hear that, that is okay to do that, and that's part of your learning and part of the apprenticeship of becoming.
Right. So then that took like a year to like fix the book. And then I started trying to go the traditional route again. And I got frustrated really early in the game. Like, they tell you should be sending out hundreds of, and I did not. I sent out some and I was like, okay, I'm done. I don't want to do this. And so I found a hybrid publisher. And that can mean different things in different places. In my particular case, I published with She Writes Press. And She Writes Press has a strong reputation in the industry. The people who run it are from traditional publishing. Their whole thing was that they had noticed when they were sitting in editorial meetings that books that were really well written weren't necessarily getting published because they weren't marketable, and the publishing company needs to make money when they publish a book. And they were getting really frustrated because they were like, we're rejecting these like beautiful books because we don't know if we can sell them, and that's not the world I want to live in. I want these books to like exist. And so what they did was they started a publishing house where the author takes on the financial risk, but they take you through the process as professionals. They can, and they do vet books. So you have to submit, you have to be accepted, you have to, your work has to meet a certain quality. If it doesn't, they either just outright reject you, or sometimes there's this in-between space where you can pay for editorial support and things like that. But so what it meant was the industry tends to respect this hybrid publisher because they're not just publishing anything. They're like picking and choosing, but the publishing company can pick and choose without considering marketability at all, and leave that to the authors to deal with, wrap their head around as they see fit. Yeah,
it's really interesting that that's one of the reasons that She Writes Press got started. I've got a friend who's just signed with a small press, and she got some great feedback from the bigger houses. You know, great writing, great story, we don't know how we'd sell it. We don't know where we would put it on a shelf. We don't know who we'd compare it to. And, you know, it is demoralizing for her, but I think for any author who hears that, on the one hand, it's like, okay, great, they love my writing. But they won't take a gamble on it. They won't use their imaginations to see where they could put this.
Sure.
It absolutely leaves space open for somebody like Brooke and her colleagues to kind of say, there is a space here for some great books. We want to fill it.
Yeah.
So and make sure you walk out. Like?
It makes sure you walk out with a quality looking product, right? Like, you know, this sits on a shelf next to books published by the Big Five, and you don't know that it's not. I mean,
no, they do a great job. So tell us about your experience there. You know, what did you learn from that? Because you're working with people who have come from the traditional space. They're going to have good high standards. Was it what you expected? Was there some surprises?
Oh, well, nothing's ever what you expect. No, I felt like working with She Writes Press, everyone was very professional. I was in good hands. I learned a ton. They were, you know, it was very much like, you know, a really great support system. The authors are really tight knit and help each other out a lot. Lots of nice people, lots of smart people. I mean, it was a good experience. It was expensive. And, you know, Brooke doesn't pretend it's not. And I think part of the thing that, you know, it would be less expensive to do it on your own. The difference is you're not going to have top-notch professionals necessarily holding your hand unless you can freelance that, and in which case you're starting to spend money again. And one thing that they offer was distribution to bookstores in a way that a lot of you would have a hard time doing on your own. And so those are kind of the two, you know, major advantages. But what they didn't do any of, and never said they would, so this was, you know, this isn't a thing, but like they didn't do any marketing. And that's just part of what they offer. So like, don't read me wrong. I'm not saying I'm mad that they didn't market my book. I'm saying, you know, I never thought they were going to. And so like a year before, when I signed my contract, knowing what all these pieces were and knowing that this had been a dream for a long time, I finished out my school year as a teacher, and then I resigned, and I spent the year before my book came out learning how to market a book. Now that was 2019 that I was learning how to market a book, and then my book came out in 2020. So plans didn't go as one thought they might. Major pivots were required. And, you know, I felt like I was learning I mean, one, I was committed to learning it, but two, that situation kind of gave me a unique entryway into it, where I, just had to learn so much so quickly, and then change everything I learned to learn it in a new environment.
Yeah.
And then now easing back into the way things were mostly ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So
you know what though, Mary, I think no matter what year your book was published in, I know things change quickly. Those skills that you have learned, because I think people, we as writers, we think, oh, once we've written the book, once we found the agent, once we've published the book, woo, we have made it. This is brilliant.
yeah.
But the next biggest hurdle is finding your readers, and that's called marketing, or just telling people about your book. And there's different ways to do that. And so I think the skills that you've learned are just, they're so invaluable, and something that all writers, whether they are traditionally published or not, really could benefit from.
Yeah. I mean, I think unfortunately a lot of writers don't think about marketing until after their book comes out. And I'm not saying that's too late. You just missed some opportunities if you don't start till then, and whenever you start, that's good. Right? You can sell a book forever, so that's good. But there is like this little window where people are you can build up some momentum around a launch. So I think that ideally authors start marketing their books in advance. I mean, a year for some like foundational stuff, not like to say buy my book a year ahead, but like, I've got a web page and it says coming soon, I've got a book, stuff like that. But literally the month before and the 3 months after are this like fantastic window where if you can pile enough stuff up, you can reach some sort of maybe tipping point of getting found.
Yes.
So many books are published.
So many books are published. And so, yeah, I think this is like a really, really excellent skill set you've got that not everybody has, but everybody needs. And so was that one of the things that you recognized? You thought, you know what, I need to help authors do this because they're missing this bit of the jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of author friends who had started like asking me questions. Why'd you do this? How'd you do this? Should I do this? And I found myself answering them and whatever. And then one of them was like, why are you should like do a business where you help authors do this stuff. And I said, well, I don't want to become a book marketer, but I wouldn't mind helping, like coaching or teaching authors how to do it. And the distinction to me is really important, right? Like, so you come spend 30 minutes with me and I'm going to give you a lot of things to do and give you advice. And maybe we follow up with a few email conversations, or maybe we do several sessions, which I do sometimes with people. But you're doing it. You're the one in charge of your book and its marketing. And I think what happens when you hire people to market your book for you, the cost of that becomes so high that it's really hard for your book sales to cover it. Right? Like they're like, hey, if you ran a marketing campaign, what would you charge me? And, I would charge you $3,000 to do what you just asked. And like, are you really going to sell that, enough books to cover that? I don't know. I can't make that promise, because you can do all the right things and you'll sell more books, but how many will you sell? I don't know. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on how good your book is, how good your book cover, luck, the timing of the industry. Like, you sometimes see books that come out and kind of don't do anything, and then like 7 years later, somehow they get discovered by someone and they're like this big hit. I mean, yeah. If there was an easy answer to marketing your book, it would be different.
We'd all be doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, you do all the right things and you hope that over time builds up enough. Your audience grows and grows and grows and grows. And you hope that it gets to a point where you hit the tipping point and it kind of takes off on its own.
Yeah.
But that doesn't always happen. It doesn't usually happen, right? So I can't, in good conscience, take thousands of dollars from someone without being able to say, yes, and I will sell you, I will sell that many copies of your book to cover that, because maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, there's no guarantees. But you know, I also think like a lot of the things involved in the author world or the business world, it's a good idea for us to learn at least the foundations of that ourselves, because even if you've got the money to spend on hiring an agency to come and do it for you, you want to be able to know what it is you're asking them to do, and you have a way of kind of measuring it and feeling
Yes.
comfortable that they are doing what you've asked them
Yes.
to do.
Yes. And I'm not saying I don't think anyone should spend any money on marketing. Don't read what I'm saying wrong. I just think if I'm going to run Facebook ads for you, your Facebook ads are costing money, and then you're paying me to do that too. Right? And then at what point does that work out for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas if you could just learn to do it yourself, you're taking that whole amount out, right? That's where I sit. And, you know, other people feel differently, but I really feel like authors starting out need to be smart with their money.
Yeah.
And their time. And there is an interesting balance between those two things.
No, you're doing such a great job to help authors, empower authors to kind of have a say and a stand in how their books are shared in the world, and then so how they're received, and as part of that difficult thing of starting to build your own brand, which is a sort of a scary term. I don't like that term, but you have a great way of doing it. So your website, I mean, you've got some free downloads for people who are just getting started and want to get a feel for what they need to be thinking about, and then also get a feel for you and how you work as well. So you've got
so if you go to my website, which is maryhelensheriff.com, and sheriff is spelled just like the policeman with 1 R and 2 F's. You can find the book marketing section in there. There's a place to sign up for my book marketing newsletter. It's called Nuts and Bolts. I send it about once a month, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but we'll go with about once a month. And when you do that, you'll get a free download, which is just a timeline of a book launch. The timeline assumes you have all the time in the world, which is often not the case, but you can at least see the things you should do first, second, third, even if your time measures are different, right? So that you get initially, and then you get the newsletter once a month, which has, you know, different tips and things like that in it.
Yeah.
And then I have a blog that there's a link to on my webpage called Journey into Book Marketing, that has more content. And then I made this as a low cost thing. So it's just a little workbook. It's called the Ultimate Book Launch Workbook. And, you know, inside, it's just a way to like cover your bases and like format your stuff, and to think through all the things you might want to do to market your book. I sell it on my webpage digitally, so you could just print out your own copy, and that's less expensive. But then on Amazon, you can buy like the actual book. So depending on,
that looks like a nice quality copy. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. I was only going to do it digitally because I was being cheap, you know, for people. Like, again, I'm trying to like think about expenses, but I had enough people say, oh, I really would prefer not to have to print it out and to buy a copy, that I went ahead and made it available on Amazon as a printed book.
I'll make sure that we link to that. Yeah, because it's a great resource for people. And even, you know, listeners, if you are not yet at that stage, you know, maybe you're still writing, you're still drafting or revising, I think it's still worth, at the very least, getting a hold of the timeline, because you can, at the back of your brain, you can be thinking about these things that you are going to need at some stage. And if you can let it kind of sink in by osmosis, it won't be such a big jump when you finally do get to that step.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as authors, especially if you're planning to do independent publishing, which, you know, seems to be more and more the case these days, like you get so excited when it's done that you just like want to like get it out there. And I think sometimes you're like making it more difficult for yourself. I mean, you and I just published 3 books together where we kind of did that. Like we weren't necessarily following my own advice, do what I say, not what I do.
Well, there were some extenuating circumstances.
Yeah, it was a thing, but I do like in regret wish we had more time to do things on the front end to support that whole process.
Yeah.
Now, luckily with nonfiction, I think that marketing can be a slower role than fiction. It seems a little bit more, I don't know.
Yeah, there's a slightly kind of I'd say a tighter thing around trying to build that buzz around the book launch
Yeah.
day. But I
Yeah.
think you're right though, you can always sell books either by, a new cover, a new blurb,
Sure. Win a
re-releasing
contest. There's always something a twist you can do on it. And,
Absolutely.
I always think to myself, Boop and Eve's Road Trip came out 3 years ago now. And when I put something on Facebook about it or something, I'll think, oh my God, everyone is so sick of this. But truthfully, I haven't brought this book up in like a month. And there are tons of people who are new to me, who are now following me, who've probably never even heard about it. So it's like silly for me not to like bring it up at least once a month. And people who have been following me for 3 years can forgive one post a month about a book they've already read. But usually they I'm not usually, a lot of times they'll like chime in and be like, oh, I love this book, so it's fine.
Yeah. And that's it. You've just got to tell people that you've got the book. Otherwise, how are they going to know?
Right. You can't assume that people know what you did 3 years ago unless you tell them.
Yeah.
So here, I'm telling you.
Oh, we're nearly at our time, unfortunately.
We should just talk all day.
I know, it's so true. I love talking with you, and I love talking to you about marketing as well, because it's such an important part of what we do, and it's so great to demystify it as well. I speak to people who are terrified at the thought of marketing their book, and they've not written the book yet, and so
yeah. I think people get like locked into some vision of what they think marketing is or has to be. And there are like a million ways to market your book, and you don't have to do all million of them. So like if the idea of being interviewed on a podcast like destroys you, you don't have to do that. Like, I mean, it is something you can do, but you don't have to do that, right? If you hate social media, you don't have to do that. Now, these are both great ways to get your book out. If you're not doing that, you're making it maybe harder, but if there's something you really love to do and you just focus all your efforts on this thing, assuming that it's a decent, strategy, that can be what you do. You can be the girl who goes to 365 book clubs in a year. I've never heard of anyone doing that, but that could be your goal. Like you could have a thing and that be your thing and get really, really great at it and leverage the heck out of it. It doesn't have to be the thing you hate.
No, I think that's so important to remind people of, because they might have heard it before, but they've forgotten that is true. So if anybody is looking for that kind of more heart-centered marketing, then go to maryhelensheriff.com and you'll get to know her and see that she will work with you in a way that benefits you and that you are comfortable with, and find a way that sits comfortably with you. Yay. Oh, Mary, it's been lovely chatting with you. So Boop and Eve's Road Trip, fabulous book. Please do read. Go and check out Mary's website, and if you are at the stage where you want to start thinking about marketing and telling people about your book, then do check it out at maryhelensheriff.com, and I will of course put the links underneath. Mary, thank you so much. It's been a joy as always.
Thanks for having me.